9:55 p.m.
PM, yeah.
Oh my lord!
Yeah,
I thought you meant AM.
Because of the scale of the festival, they do have to up the security
Yeah,
bit. So
100%.
we ran two, and the first one kind of went a bit nuts.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Tune, episode number 2. I'm your host Nikita, and on the show today, instead of a DJ, we have a event organizer or a part of an event organization company. We have Luke Harvey, who is the one of the 4 members of the Animal House organization group. Thanks for being on the podcast today, and I'm excited to sort of get your perspective of the techno scene, but from an event organization space rather than someone that's like a DJ.
100%. Thank you for having me. I mean, it's interesting to kind of go into how these two sides collide, as you said before. And I mean, obviously we see it from our perspective, but I mean, as a podcast series, it'll be really interesting to hear kind of both sides of the coin.
Yeah. So I think we'll just get straight into it. Sort of, where did Animal House sort of originate from? And sort of, you were talking here before that you sort of did a bit of events before Animal House, and sort of you started now you've got this brand of Animal House that's hosted the likes of Trym, and obviously I'm assuming it's going to be bigger names in the future. So how did that sort of start? And
so, I mean, we started off originally just DJing. We started off our first kind of event, if you want to call it, was at Schoolies in 2020. We all graduated. All of my year group graduated right in the middle of COVID. So we had Schoolies all booked, and we all went up there, and there was nothing to do. All the clubs were shut.
Yeah.
You were all just
in Queensland?
Up at Byron Bay. We couldn't go to Queensland.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
point,
true.
All the border restrictions.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was our first kind of event, and back then it wasn't just us. There was 5 of us. Sorry, there was me and 4 other guys, and back then, as a Schoolies thing, it was just like a whole group of 20 or 30 mates, and we thought, okay, we can't go to a club, so we had a car up there, so we went to Bunnings, bought a generator, and we had decks and some speakers up there, and we just went from there. I think the first one, we ran 2, and the first one kind of went a bit nuts. I don't even know how many people were there, but that one got shut down after, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, right.
And then so we tried again on the second night, and it went up until sunrise, and there was a couple of 100 people at some point, and it was a lot of fun. And so we got back and we thought, look, this is pretty fun. We'll see where this goes.
Yeah.
And we ran some events in Sydney. We ran one at Club 77, one at Colt over in Potts Point. And we had Trym last month, and we've got a couple of shows lined up for the end of the year.
Yeah, sweet.
So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So you started with what, like just the classic old bush stuff.
Yep.
And now you've sort of ventured into actual venues and big names instead of just people behind a deck.
Yeah, I mean exactly. I mean, the best way to put it is we used to kind of play at our own events.
Yeah.
Like the one at 77, we all got up there and played, and we had Persian Rug on there as well as some other guys from Sydney. But I mean, it kind of gets to a point where as you said, you're kind of pulling some bigger names onto it, and we're not going to put ourselves up on a lineup with Trym just because we're running the event. We want it to. Of course. We kind of made the decision to kind of take it a step further and get some really good acts on there. And so we had Bella Claxton and Six Sense supporting Trym, which they were fantastic. Yeah, I was actually at that event. Yeah, I remember. I came in halfway through Six Sense, and that was awesome. Liberty Hall's also a very great venue itself. So 100%. I had a coffee with one of the guys over at T1000 who run Electric Gardens this morning, and they came to Trym as well, and they were asking about Liberty Hall, and I was saying I've spent plenty of time working with them over the last couple of months, and I was just saying to them, great venue to work with, really great team, and they've really. I think the main thing for us as a smaller group is just kind of getting the bookings organised can be a bit of a challenge because obviously there's not that many venues in Sydney, and there's heaps of collectives and promoters.
Yeah, of course.
And so like these guys, I'm sure, get bombarded by emails all the time, and so it can be quite a challenge to get dates sorted, and obviously with moving parts with tours and whatever. But the guys at Liberty Hall did a fantastic job. They were responsive to emails, really clear chain of kind of who to talk to and when. And so, yeah, we're definitely looking to... I'm not sure if we have them booked in the future. I'm not too... I can't remember off the top of my head, but once the right show comes along, we'll be looking to go back there 100%.
Okay. Yeah, because that is actually a cool venue. And obviously, if they've got good, what's it called? Management there, that's 100%. Great. Where did you sort of get when did the brand of Animal House sort of come in from? Because obviously Trym was an Animal House event, but before that was it labelled Animal House? Or
Animal House kind of naturally evolved from, obviously, as I said before, from five mates DJing, and one of the guys in particular, Gus Gillies, he wanted to do it as a career from the get-go, and so we were all a bit unsure coming out of high school, pretty young, pretty green, and we thought, not too sure. Didn't have any money at that point either. So, I mean, that was kind of a big thing. And Gus took the initiative on himself, and he started up the Goose Club. Pretty good name, but
is that still a thing?
No. So the Goose Club evolved into what is Animal House now.
Right. Okay.
And so once Gus started kind of laying out some ideas he had, and the potential that there was for the future, he needed a bit of help and asked if the other four of us wanted to come on. And there was a couple of others in the early days, and then as we started running events and people were at uni and working, people kind of came and left. But the five of us that are there today were some of the seven that we started with.
I'll say 7 initially.
Yeah, 7. It was Gus, then 7, then now the 5 that there is now.
Right. And did either of you or any of you go to do any formal study for event organization, like in uni or?
I gave in my first semester of my second year, I gave event management a crack.
Yeah. How's that?
I don't get me wrong. I have enjoyed uni, but it only lasted one semester. I thought of it the same way you did, in terms of, okay, if I want to do this as a career, I might want to legitimize myself a bit and get a bit of understanding. And there was some good stuff that they kind of went over around kind of stakeholder management, and a lot of it would be things that I would think about in terms of a much larger festival. And it wasn't, I kind of looked at it in terms of, okay, financial management of events will be something that I'd love to learn a bit more about. But it wasn't really kind of cutting it for me. And I thought, look, I'm learning a lot just by running the events themselves, and you can learn on the fly quite quickly. But so I dropped it after one semester and then moved on to what I'm doing now, which is economics and finance.
Right, that's actually exactly what I studied. I actually graduated last year, so
well, I've got 6 weeks left of this semester, and then another 12 months after that. Finish halfway through next year.
Yeah, the home stretch.
Oh, finally.
Yeah. So that's good that you sort of, I guess there was more. It's more practical than it is theoretical, event management, in a way.
100%.
What are any of the other 4 that do it? Are they sort of in uni doing event management, or are they sort of just learning it like you on the fly?
It's all kind of been a bit of a group learning process, to be honest. I think so some of them are studying, some of them aren't. Gus is moving to Berlin for a year, which will be exciting. He's going to live in Germany for a year, so that'll be really exciting.
That will be fun.
And the other 3 of them, some of them are in uni, some of them are working part-time.
Right.
We're all working part-time.
Yeah.
And but it's like, as one person learns things, you kind of share that with the group, and
of course,
and kind of go through and learn that way.
Yeah. And do you have designated roles for each other?
It was never really, okay, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. It was kind of, okay, like this needs to be done, who's on it. Everyone knows their strengths, everyone knows what they're good at. But in terms of kind of some of the bookings management, a lot of that will be me, and a lot of that is down to just some of the people I've been lucky enough to meet over mainly the last 12 to 18 months, I'd say. Through
Animal House, obviously. The initial event organisation, and through Animal House.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a growing tree of people you meet. I mean, one of the most notable ones would probably be Kyle Hand over at the Hardware Group. I met him because I booked Laura last year. I booked her for the Cult event we did, like it was June 8th last year.
Yeah.
And that was a decent event. It was a couple of hundred people. Didn't sell out, but Kyle was really great to work with, and obviously Hardware is one of the established brands in the scene in Australia. I think Hardware and Untitled, I think, are the two kind of benchmarks really between touring, which I think Hardware, in my experience working with them, a lot more in depth on the touring side of things, and then obviously we all know Untitled because of festivals. because of their major events and festivals. Pitch, I don't know about you, but Pitch is definitely the
I went to Pitch this year as well.
Yeah, that was definitely an experience this year.
How was it? Did you enjoy it?
Is
that your first pitch?
I was on the phone to one of my mates on the way here. It was my second pitch.
Oh, your second pitch.
So I went last year as well, but I was saying to one of my mates that, where do you go from that? It was so I was lucky enough to go to Europe last year, and I went to Awakenings in Amsterdam. That was fantastic.
Oh wow!
But a lot of the sets I saw at Pitch were up there with
like a European.
Up there with the European standard.
Wow, that's impressive.
And I mean, for me, everyone kind of has like a top list of the sets that they've had and witnessed, and I think Tale of Us closing Awakenings last year for me is still top.
Right.
But I was saying to one of the guys that Sunday at Pitch, from Mino Lataf to the end of Fatima Yamaha, that was up there as well.
I forgot. Oh, that Sunday I think I was definitely feeling it on that Sunday, so I don't think I remember much of it. But that Fatima Yamaha set, I do. Yeah, that set was. It was like one of the sets that you look forward to. It was only an hour, but it felt like he was playing for hours on end. And then obviously, What's a Girl to Do came on, and then
magic.
Yeah, it was legit. Like
real magic.
I think that's what everyone was waiting for, and that's what everyone was like. The blokes that I went with were all super keen for that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pitch was definitely an experience. Yeah, that was my first pitch.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so it was a good one to go to.
Sure,
but we're definitely going back.
Yeah, we're definitely going back. Everyone says the same thing.
One of my mates actually already bought one of the like early release tickets, so he's already like bought his ticket. None of the other boys have because like we don't have the money for it at the moment.
When we all came back from Pitch, we're like, oh, should we buy? Like we're all going to end up going anyway, and it's a bit cheaper now. But you come off the back of Pitch and you're like, I have no money again.
Yeah, they capitalize on that post festival come down that you have.
Yeah,
and they sort of like capitalize on that by giving you the ticket and saying it's cheaper than it will be next year. And then they get a bunch. So my mate fell for it, but I mean he's got his ticket, so he doesn't have to worry about it.
And I mean with Pitch, I would love to see. There's obviously a lot of things to go into it.
Yeah.
And depending on who you talk to, some will say it'll never happen and some will say that there's a bit of hope. But I would love to see a Pitch-esque kind of festival in New South Wales with that same level of kind of I don't know, freedom. Production's one thing, but
the freedom.
You go to Pitch and it's just this wide, expansive space of people just enjoying themselves. And I haven't been lucky enough to go to Lost Paradise yet, but I don't. From what I've heard, I don't think people get that sense from Lost. I'm sure that's down to so many different things that people a lot more experienced than me can talk about. But I think Victoria and Untitled have created something really magic with Pitch.
And the fact that Pitch is still in its considerably very early stages.
Yeah.
But because I also went to Lost Paradise for the New Year, and in comparison to Pitch, the freedom is like you can't compare it because obviously, first of all, there's no check-in to get into the festival, and then second of all, there's a BYO component into Pitch, which is awesome. And then they obviously have the whole like you bring your chair in and you can bring whatever you want into the festival. Yep. Whereas you don't really get that with like other festivals like Splendor or Falls or Lost Paradise.
You don't even get that in Europe. Like when we went to Awakenings, we'd obviously been to Pitch and we thought, oh, it's Europe, they'll be pretty lax. And not to say they were strict by any means, but because of the scale of the festival, they do have to up the security bin.
100%.
And every day you kind of get up and you walk through a security gate to get into the festival ground. It, as you said, it doesn't have like you just walk in, ticket scan, and then you're in the festival. Yeah. In Europe you have, and at Awakening specifically, you have the campsite, separate area, and there are some stages at the campsite that are a bit smaller, but and you have to go through the security to get in there. And I'd love to experience some more European festivals. Unfortunately, I'm not going this year, but some of them that come to mind would be, I think it's Aeon Festival in Croatia or Albania.
Right,
and then there's Dimensions Festival in, again, Croatia or Albania.
Right, okay.
Those two are the two that kind of come to mind in terms of a European version of that pitch level of freedom for me. And so I'd love to tick those boxes one day.
Yeah, I've never actually heard of those two. I think the main ones that come with Europe is like Tomorrowland. Yeah. You have obviously the UK ones, Leeds, Reading, Glastonbury.
Horton's another one in the UK that I obviously I haven't been, but some of the guys that are a bit older than us, I went I think last year or the year before, and they compared Horton in terms of a pitch experience.
Right. Okay.
And I've seen plenty of videos of some of the Horton stages, and it's on the more minimal side. So some of the deep house, and Sash-esque kind of stuff. Yeah. But they run it in like a forest, and I saw this one video of a stage, and it looks absolutely nuts. They've got strobes in the trees, and it looks crazy. I'd love to tick off
the box.
But, maybe next year.
Yeah. No, that sounds cool. I think pitch. I think as you said, they've got like a really good. They've sort of established themselves as this festival where it's like very chill. Yeah. It's like 4 days. It's still like, you still get that festival vibe, but it's not as strict as most festivals. And the funny thing is though, as much as there was it wasn't as tight security as most other festivals, there wasn't that increased level of rowdiness or even violence. It was sort of like, as if anything, felt like it was less because there was that freedom. So
I think a lot of people would agree with it. I think for a lot of the crowd, part of the reason that pitch is so good is because of the people that go. Yeah. And it's mystical to me that has kind of all come together. Normally, once a festival is renowned to be that good, you get two things kind of happen. They either push the capacity and then heaps of people come, or it's impossible to get a ticket and you lose that, as you said, that kind of
authenticity
and the I don't know, the kind of people that go to it can, as you said, be a bit more violent and a bit more aggressive.
Yeah, no, I think you're right in that sense that they sort of it's like a little echo chamber.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to a podcast with Phil Palermo, who is obviously CEO of Untitled, talking about pitch, and he made mention of the fact that Untitled kind of recognizes how delicate pitch is, which I think for a company of Untitled size, I think they've done a really good job of, as you say, keeping themselves authentic, and to recognize that you can't just, with a festival like pitch, you can't just flog the capacity and just try and make as much money off it as possible, because then, as you said, you lose what pitch is. You lose that kind of crowd that wants to go to it.
Yeah, but I feel like as well, naturally, as pitch starts to become a bit more known and a bit more mainstream, and people start sort of tapping into techno and house, I feel like it will sort of naturally attract more people. But I think as long as, I guess, Untitled sort of keep that sort of I don't know to say, like, the authenticity of pitch the same, then I don't think much will be different in the future.
100%.
So I want to also touch, moving back to Animal House, sort of want to touch quickly on the process of sort of booking artists. So obviously you had Trym last month. Obviously I don't think it's just like a DM that's like, hey, come to Sydney. I feel like there's a lot more that goes into it, and obviously as someone who loves these sort of events and obviously sees these people on stage, I want to know what the process is behind booking them, getting them on stage, bringing them to Australia, because obviously he doesn't live here. So sort of just walk me through that, I guess, initial process of getting him into Sydney, basically, or into Australia.
Well, there's kind of two ways that you can approach bringing internationals to Australia. You can either tour them yourself, which it might not be a DM, but it'll likely be an email. You'll find a email address there's heaps of them on most artists' SoundClouds. Yeah. Some of them have them in their Instagram bios. And you send an email over to their management and you say, pretty much, hey guys, love X and X's stuff. Think you'd go down really well in Australia. Would you guys be keen on coming over? Yeah. And then if they say yes, then if you're touring, then you have to send out emails to promoters that in whatever city you're not in. So I mean, if we were looking at a tour, we'd look at Newcastle. The guys over at Daydreaming have done a great job up there.
Yeah.
We obviously look down to Melbourne, and then there's a collective in Perth who I think is relatively new. I heard of them a couple of months ago, called DS Events.
Right.
And so it's really, really good to see some collectives kind of growing in those other cities, because obviously it's all well and good for Sydney and Melbourne shows to make money and to make a tour feasible, but artists when they come here want to have 3, 4, 5 show tours.
Yeah.
And so you can't execute that all in Sydney and Melbourne. And so it's really great to see that Perth's growing as well. And I think when I was talking to the guys at T1000 this morning, they ran an event called Electric Island, so kind of a branch off of Electric Gardens.
Yeah.
They ran it on Cottesloe Beach, and I saw some photos and some videos of it, and it looked really, really good. And so, look, maybe one day we'll reach out to Perth and expand it that way. But
that'd be pretty cool. Tapping into like another market as well. With Perth.
And the other way that you can go around booking artists is through a touring agency. So Hardware, Untitled, offers acts out to be toured as well, and sometimes they have a database, an email database, that if they're touring someone, they'll announce it to that database. Or if there's someone in particular that you are interested in having but aren't up for touring, or you've got a bit too much on your plate to conduct a tour, they can, if they're interested as well, then they'll look into the possibilities and see what they can do, because Hardware and Untitled are companies that are built for efficiency when it comes to tour, and like they've built their business model off successfully executing massive tours.
All right, so that's how it sort of goes. Very interesting. So like then you sort of go through Untitled, and then Trym will eventually, or I guess in the context of Trym, will come down to Sydney. Yeah,
so with Trym, that was all done through Hardware. So Hardware was the touring agency. They organise flights, visas, and an itinerary for, as I said, shows around Australia. And so we're a small part of that in terms of we were talking directly with Kyle, and he made the offer to us. Obviously there's a negotiation around fees, and that involves the inclusion of accommodation and flights. But in terms of once that agreement's done and you've got a venue sorted, then that's kind of that booking box ticked, and it's Hardware's responsibility, if you like, to make sure that he gets to Australia, make sure that all the flights are on time, and that the itinerary proceeds as planned.
So at any point in time, are you personally in contact with Trym?
Yeah, so we get in contact with Trym in kind of the week before to organise who's picking him up from the airport, if there's going to be a driver, and just like all the other semantics that kind of go into running the event. And so we for Trym, he was flying in a bit later. He flew in at about 10 o'clock. So
the day before,
the day of.
Oh, the day of.
His flight landed at, I think it was 9:55 or something. And
Jesus.
For a 12 o'clock set, we were a little bit nervy, but.
Oh wait, 9:55 p.m.
PM, yeah.
Oh my lord. I thought you meant AM, like he had like a day in Sydney.
Sorry, I should have been clearer. He flew in 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and just because we were a little bit skeptical of the timing, we decided to go and pick him up from the airport personally.
Right.
And so I wasn't in the car, but one of the guys that were in the joint venture with us, so the guys over at Scenes, they picked him up from the airport, took him back to the hotel, and then drove him over to Liberty Hall just in time for 12 o'clock.
Within 2 hours.
Yeah.
Wow, that would have been stressful, wouldn't have been.
I mean, once the event's going, I think there's nothing you can do at that point. We looked into moving his flights around, but we were confident that it would work out. We it particularly because a lot of the flight cancellations and things have died down now. I think it's off the holiday season, and all ended up working well. And then of course we drove him back to the airport Sunday morning.
The next day, was it?
Yep, because he had to go down for the picnic finale.
Oh, in Melbourne?
Down in Melbourne. So they had Ben Clark, Talia, Trym, and Shlomo.
Right. Okay. So I didn't realize that they come in so late. I thought they would have came in like a couple of days before.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I think the main thing for Trym was because he wanted to go. Obviously, the Melbourne Grand Prix was on that weekend. It was weekend of the first. So he wanted to go and see the qualifying.
Right. Okay.
Down in, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
If it was my first time in Australia and there was a Grand Prix on, I'd love to go to it. But so he had flown from. He played in Perth on the Friday, flew at 6 a.m. from Perth to Melbourne the night after his show.
Mm-hmm.
Went to the qualifying and then grabbed his bags, went straight to the airport, got straight in a flight and came to Sydney.
And back to Melbourne the next day.
And then back to Melbourne the next day.
You wouldn't think they'd be so like busy for him. Like you see all these. I mean, as you said, it depends on the artist. But you see a lot of these Instagram stories of like these artists coming to Australia and they're sort of here like a week before their show, just sort of living it up. But Trym's like in and out.
I think sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If you've got a 2-weekend tour, obviously there's a week in between that they can chill out and go and see some kangaroos or some koalas or something, which a lot of them do. I mean, I remember seeing a Instagram story of Charlotte DeWitt, I think it was, and like she'd gone off to the zoo to go and see some kangaroos.
When you're here, you might as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what most international artists want to do. They want to see the Harbour Bridge and
be a tourist.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think the sense I get is that they all love coming to Australia. I think whilst Australia might not have some of the caliber of clubs of Germany, Italy, and all those places, I think in terms of especially in the summer, a really nice place to come to. Yeah,
and I think the scene and crowd down here is also very like, obviously because we want to see them down here, because I think in comparison to some big like I guess pop acts, you barely see them down here. Like you'll see them here once every few years for an album tour, whereas you see like all these massive techno artists, even hardstyle for example, they're here every single a few times a year at least. So you always have the opportunity to see those big artists, whereas with like the mainstream music, like your Harry Styles and stuff like that, it's very difficult for them to come out here. When they do, tickets are like go like that. So
exactly, yeah. And I've heard all number of stories about like the touring of these massive pop acts, and to be honest, I'm really glad I work in the electronic music space.
Really?
Because I mean I've just heard there was, I can't remember specifics on it, but there was part of the podcast I was listening to with Phil Palermo. He was talking about how they got God, what's her name? One of the big pop acts for their BTV, and I think she came on the stage with Dom Dollar.
Nelly Furtado.
Nelly Furtado.
Yeah.
God, I can't believe I forgot that. But he was talking about it on the podcast and what a challenge it was.
Wow.
And because like they have such full schedules,
that's true.
They would either be needing to take a break or would probably be flat out. And so, yeah, as you said, with a lot of the electronic music artists, whether it's deep house, techno, or whatever you're looking at, a lot of them are really down to earth, and some of them, like, they're mega stars.
Yeah.
DeWitt and all of them, but they're still really kind of down to earth people.
Yeah, I think because they can appreciate the scene for what it is.
100%.
So I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
What about when it comes to booking? Again, going back to that Trym event, booking like 6 Sense and Bella Claxton, is that a bit? I'm assuming that's a lot simpler than it is to book Trym, or is it sort of the same process we have to go through?
It's a very, very similar process to what we'd go through to book Trym through Kyle, through Hardware.
Yeah, right.
Because essentially Kyle is acting as a manager. And if you think about it in terms of, not in terms of Trym as an international, but Trym as another artist that's in Australia, then you're still approaching management with a date. If that's available, then you're going through fees and venues and all of that. So it's a very similar process. Obviously, when you get to booking internationals, there is a whole raft of costs involved in getting them here.
Yeah,
so
right.
that kind of cost of international flights and of managing the actual trip itself, I think that's an added cost that you're paying as a fee. And so from what I've heard, I think normal European fees are quite all right. I mean, I've heard that some of the smaller acts in particular, I don't know, Bad Boombox is one that really comes to mind. I've heard fee numbers around 2,000 to 3,000 euros, which is what, like 4,500, 6,000, 5,000, maybe a bit less.
And what's that in comparison to say something you'd say in Australia?
Well, obviously Bad Boombox is a small artist in a European market, but would be quite a large artist if you came here. Obviously not X Club kind of size, but I would say somewhere in between. I don't know what X Club would be at the moment. They've kind of taken off, but
they have
somewhere in between kind of X Club and Bella Claxton kind of point.
Okay,
he's in Bad Boombox. Is great artist, great music. One of my favorites in that kind of trancey kind of bounce. Yeah,
I'll give that a listen. Actually, I've never heard of. I probably
you're in for a treat.
Stumbled across him, but I've never actually properly listened to it. Yeah, there is just that much. There is that much music out there that it's very hard to sort of 100%. Get across everyone. I was also going to ask, since there's so many, I guess, these sort of event organisation companies around Sydney or just around New South Wales and Victoria specifically, how do you as Animal House sort of stand out, and how do you sort of differentiate yourself? Because obviously it's very easy to just be an event organisation company, but how do you sort of be that point of where's your like point of difference?
I think different from a normal kind of goods and services company. I think the way we stand out has to constantly kind of change and evolve. And as a small group, compared to like an Untitled who would have several different points of where they stand out. Pitch is one of them. Beyond the Valley for a lot of people would be another. Yeah. We are still kind of learning and evolving in, as you said, what is our standout point? Why do people come to our events? Mm-hmm. And I think one important thing to identify what those points of difference are is kind of once we start to achieve a bit of scale on events. So Trym for us was the first time I think we sold out online, which was 1,200 tickets, and then I think we had 53 on the door, and then plus guest list. So that was the first time we'd kind of gotten into and seen a bit of scale. That's a small kind of point to start on, obviously, compared to hosting shows at Horden and some of the external kind of festivals. 1,300 is nothing. Yeah,
but it's still a
good number. We were really happy with how it went, and obviously the numbers that it pulled. But in terms going back to that point of difference, I think you have to start by curating kind of a sense of what acts that you're going to get, and that's not limited to genre. I think genre is quite a limited point to look at it. As a collective, we feel that we can go beyond just faster techno, and if the opportunity presents itself to kind of curate an event that maybe it's in the deep house space, that would be something we'd love to do, and that would be an entirely different point of difference for people to come to our events. And so over the next 3 to 5 years, I think my answer to that question will change. Hopefully, as we can execute some events where people, like Trym was a good start, people kind of recognize that event, recognize the brand that goes with it, and you start to build this catalog of identity to the brand. And as I said, it stretches beyond genre, and I like to think of kind of promoting in general as like, what lens do people see your events through? Because all the branding, all the marketing, obviously you're marketing the event itself, but in doing so, you're creating a natural perception around how people see your event. Yeah, of course. That will develop depending on the type and genre and size of the event as well.
So you're more, what I'd say, artist focused rather than genre focused. So you're more into like booking. Yep. I guess the artists, you're selling the name rather than the actual event. I think that makes sense.
No, 100%. I think it makes sense, and I think it goes beyond selling a name or the brand. I think it steps into a kind of, for this event, we're going to look into these artists. These artists present this genre in their own way.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think looking at it in terms of just an artist or genre perspective, I think each artist has their own way of presenting their genre.
Mm-hmm.
And as a brand, you have your own way of presenting the artist.
Yeah, of course.
It all kind of comes together with each event. And as I said, over the next 3 to 5 years, that might become more consistent as we identify those things that we really kind of respond well to, and audiences really respond well to as well.
Yeah. So can you sort of speak to the, I guess, space of event organization for the next 3 to 5 years as someone that's actually in it? I've
So,
yeah. I mean, sort of like, I guess you can obviously speak to Animal House, the company that you run, but I guess on a broader perspective, can you sort of see this becoming more of like a mainstream thing, or is it sort of going to eventually, fizzle out?
Look, I think I'll speak first to kind of where I'd love to see Sydney events go, and I think part of that will be a bit of an expansion into outdoor spaces and events outside of the standard club model.
Yeah,
I think Sydney has some really good clubs, and I think Club 77, Liberty Hall, etc., etc. But I think a lot of the things you see in Europe, the first thing that comes to mind is Modular Ghent I think it's in Brussels, which was a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And they're not events necessarily held in clubs. They're events held in random spaces,
right,
in warehouse car parks and things like that. And so I would love to see an expansion beyond the club model, because it has its strengths, but there is a lot more. Using a space outside of that, it kind of does leave you with a bit of a blank canvas in terms of what you can do. And talking to people that are more experienced than me, that have run those kind of events before, Electric Gardens and things like that, they have one kind of repeated theme is it is quite difficult in New South Wales, especially over the last 8 to 12 years, where we've had a Liberal government that's been quite strict on
lockout laws.
Well, lockout laws is one thing that affected the clubs quite a lot, but I've heard a lot of red tape, costs, and all of that are associated with moving the event out from the club space.
Yeah,
and so,
okay.
And we would love to look into it, and hopefully with the new government that we've got now, there are talks going on to maybe remove a little bit of the red tape, and
right,
because it is doable for the larger groups. T1000 that runs Electric Gardens, for example, but in terms of involving some of the groups that have achieved a bit of scale and have got the capacity to take on an event like that, I think I'd love to see what the possibilities are with that.
Yeah, because I think the first thing that comes to mind when you sort of say that outdoorsy, different sort of venue outside of the club is I don't know if you've seen them, but they're Circle on YouTube.
100%.
I think they're French, and they host all these events that are just in absurd spots. Like they had Ben Bomber in like a floating air balloon, and they had, I think, Cast or KSST at like an airstrip on like a tarmac. So I think, is that what sort of you're going? Obviously not that extreme.
Yeah, maybe a bit less dramatic. I think Circle's done really well in terms of, like, they have access to some of the most beautiful sites in the world.
Yeah.
And Sydney has those sites, I must say, but as a start, I wouldn't be expecting to, host a party on the Harbour Bridge or anything. I think that's a bit of a stretch. But no, I what comes to mind for me is the is Ava Festival in Ireland, for one.
Yep.
And the No Art Festival, which I don't know what city they held that in, but
what's that one?
So No Art's a music label. I think some of the Sydney DJs are on it, but I forget who. I won't name names in case I'm wrong.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I know Anoda is on there, who released one of the kind of songs of the summer a couple of months ago.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
it was on TikTok.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
It's a massive TikTok sound.
Yeah.
And so the label ran a festival a couple of months ago, kind of end of European summer last year.
Yeah.
And they had kind of wide open space with a whole production structure that they'd built, but it was completely separate from. It wasn't like a festival. It was kind of a label showcase.
Yeah, okay.
And obviously we're not a label, but that kind of outdoor event we'd love to do.
Yeah, because I think you're making a lot of links towards Europe, and I think that's sort of where, I guess, if we sort of want to move, it's sort of we have to move towards that, because obviously the scene in Europe is tenfold to what it is in Sydney. But I guess in comparison to something like Melbourne, because they obviously have a much stronger scene down there, they obviously, their clubs and stuff are still, within that traditional sort of club framework, but they sort of have a lot, it's a lot stronger down there and a lot more hyped.
I think, Melbourne has, as you said, they've built a really strong club scene. I was down there end of February, start of February.
Yeah.
And obviously I went to Revs.
Yeah.
And I mean,
everyone knows Revs.
Revs is it's a fantastic club, fantastic sound system. And it kind of has a sense of that freedom that we were talking about before with pitch. It's obviously it's a venue and you can't push it too far, but so long as you're respectful and nothing gets too out of hand, I think it has done a really good job of elevating the club scene to that level. And obviously I'd love to see that kind of level of clubbing be available in Sydney. I think that's a kind of good foundation for any city to grow its electronic music scene, is to have the clubs to do it in. And Abercrombie is the one that comes to mind in terms of getting to that point. I don't know if you've been, but
I haven't been, but I've heard of it. Is that recent?
Yeah, it opened a couple of months ago.
Right.
And I mean, I was there last night. Who
was playing there?
It was Bailey Ibbs and Stranger, also known as Taff Camp. And so
what sort of music is that? More
it's faster techno,
Fast techno, right.
And that was hosted by Justin over at Raw and Michael over at Undisclosed. They did a JV for that.
Yeah.
And Abercrombie is a really, really good quality club. So the main point of differentiation between clubs for me in Sydney is the sound system.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think
in comparison to Melbourne.
I think Melbourne has always had really strong sound systems. You go to Revs and it's really properly loud. Yeah,
I've been to Revs for about 4 years now. We went to Melbourne last year, but we didn't get a chance to go into Revs. We went to another club, which was still crazy, but we didn't get the chance to go to Revs. But next time I go, I'll definitely pay attention to the sound system.
I think I think especially in Sydney, differentiating some clubs, there are some that are weaker than others. I think if you're comparing the sound system at Abercrombie to, I don't know, Ivy, it's Abercrombie's got 4 function ones focused on one kind of small dance floor, and so the sound is massive in there.
Oh, really?
And as a collective, the group of 5 of us, that's something that we've really learned to appreciate in terms of
the sound.
That we think that that's something that's really important to certainly our kind of target markets and the market generally.
Yeah.
And so I agree. I think the clubbing in Sydney can evolve, and Abercrombie is a great step towards that. But I think in terms of where I'd want to see Animal House move, I'd love to see, as I said, a special event, and we'd love to be able to make a bit of change in that direction. Obviously, as I said, it's quite hard and quite costly to execute those special events. But if the opportunity was there to discuss with councils and I don't know, government maybe to kind of get a bit of perspective on what smaller groups like ours can do to kind of move to that next step, because we do think that that kind of future is there, and I think if it's well coordinated, well consulted and well ran, I think getting one done will be a big first step.
Yeah,
because I think unless you achieve the scale, so Mode Festival did their festival at Cockatoo Island last year,
right,
and that achieves a pretty significant scale. I don't know how many people were there exactly, but
is that like a techno festival as well?
Yeah, so Bizarro, the guys over at Bizarro run it, and Bizarro is another great brand in Sydney, but Mode Festival, its first edition was last year, and it was probably one of my favorite festivals in Sydney.
Did you go?
Yeah, I went with just a small group of my friends last year, and they have it in the in the massive turbine hall that they've got at Cockatoo Island. So it's a massive space, and I'd love to see it used a bit more, but I can imagine it's obviously I'm not across it, but I can imagine it's pretty expensive to get full production and everything onto the island. So maybe not achieving that scale, but
in the short term at least.
in the short term at least. But as I said, even consulting it and creating in a way that it can be, obviously it has to be cost effective for us to run it, but bringing down the scale a bit and still being able to execute that special event would be fantastic for us.
No, that's awesome. I think it's a good perspective to bring in, because obviously as someone who sort of just goes to these events, you never really understand the scale of them. I think hearing it from someone like you, it's very interesting to sort of understand behind the scenes and the inner workings of actually running these events and the amount of work that actually goes into it. It's not just, messaging a couple of DJs and then tell them to come over and then setting up some decks. But I think it's awesome because obviously you seem like, Animal House seems like obviously you guys are future driven, forward looking, which is awesome. And I think just hearing that as someone who goes to these events is very encouraging. Like it's awesome to hear. So
it's great for you to hear. And when I get the chance to talk to some of the guys that have kind of been there, done that, and ticked those boxes, some of them have done it in several different countries.
Yeah, right.
And I have the same feeling when I sit down and have a chat with them. The experiences that they talk about and some of the difficulties they've had, I find are the most interesting parts to kind of sit there and listen to, because it is more complicated than, obviously, as you said, than just emailing a couple of DJs, but those difficulties can kind of come out of nowhere sometimes, and you'll have, thankfully for Trym, we had, between the joint venture between us and Scenes, it all went relatively smoothly. It all went quite well. We didn't have too many problems.
Yeah, right.
But you couldn't really list the amount of areas that, if they can go wrong, they really can go wrong badly. And so you hear stories here and there, but you try to kind of plan for everything as best as possible. And sometimes things work out and sometimes things don't.
Do you have any stories of when things have sort of gone to shit very quickly?
I haven't. I've been lucky enough that I haven't had a shit hit the fan moment. Yeah. But God, I couldn't.
I'm sure there's so many of them.
there were, as I said, there are people that have gone through the ringer and come out the other side, and some that haven't.
Yeah.
And it can be down to, I think most guys like me and most collectives have a good sense of what sells and what doesn't, but sometimes the way that the market is at the moment, you can pick up an act, think it's going to sell, and then you have to put on the show and it doesn't sell. I think I think things are I think a lot of people in the industry will say that things are a bit tighter at the moment. I think a lot of people
after COVID.
Not after COVID. I think the COVID effect is worn off. I think the everyone wants to go to Europe effect is the one that's kind of kicking right now. And so we're taking a break from now until September 8th.
It's a bit of an off period for Australia with winter, and then plus you got the Europe hype right now. So
it's winter is always an off month for Australia because obviously it's cold and people don't want to be lugging jackets around to events. And there are collectives, respect to them, that continue to host weekly events, especially throughout the winter. But we'll be taking a break until September 8th because obviously there is time between now and middle of June when most people are going away. But for us, I think we've got some shows lined up at the end of the year, and we will kind of consolidate those and make those as good as possible.
Yeah, well, that's good. I guess you have that winter time sort of plan and get everything sorted so that when it comes to summer, it'll just be crazy. So with Animal House, are you still going to be looking at doing monthly events, or are you looking to sort of make it more more frequent, maybe weekly, fortnightly events?
We've never approached when we first started, we approached it in terms of, let's try and do events each month, let's try and do events each week. But the reality of working as a promoter in Australia is you don't always get to pick and choose.
Yeah.
You got to kind of take what's given to you unless you create the opportunity. So for us, if say I get an email tomorrow, and we've got 2 shows planned in November.
Right.
One on the 11th, one on the 25th.
Right.
And say I got an email tomorrow for an act that I was desperate to have. I would be thinking of putting it in between those 2 events. You'd have 3 events in a month.
Yeah, okay.
But then some other months we wouldn't have an event at all, just because that's, unless we've created an opportunity for ourselves, that's just not what's available. And that's the kind of limitation that you have to work in.
Yeah, of course.
Especially now that internationals, I feel are they're the bog standard.
Yeah.
In terms of there are some events, and I have massive respect to them, that have generated a really good following using Australian talent and local talent.
Yeah.
And we of course ran shows coming off the back of COVID when there were no internationals, but when that opportunity presented itself, of course we jumped at it. And I might be wrong, but for me, the way forward for Animal House is to continue with the international,
and then have local Aussie artists supporting.
Yeah, and that might change for an act like X Club. X Club,
Yeah.
I don't think would really need, if the opportunity to host X Club presented itself.
Yeah.
If there was an international to pair with them,
That'd be awesome.
of course we'd execute that, but we wouldn't not host the event with X Club because we don't have an international.
They're hanging out with DJ Heartstring.
I know.
As of late, so that could potentially be on the cards.
Heartstrings just finished up a tour off the back of Pitch. So
yeah, of course, and they're going into like Europe summer. So.
Yep. It'll be. I think there won't be too many internationals for a while.
Yeah.
Actually, I think BLK is coming in
June 15th.
June.
Oh, he's doing a whole week. He's doing a 14th to 16th tour, which is crazy. Didn't think about that. Literally, I think he's doing Perth, Melbourne, Sydney.
Yeah.
And
I haven't been following it too closely, but I've seen that it's gained a lot of traction on sign-ups for tickets and things like that. So that'll be a great tour. I'd love to see BLK. I missed him last year.
Yeah, because he did come last year, and then BPM hosted him.
Yep. And BPM's hosting the tour this year, I think, as well.
Yeah, they are. I think in conjunction with a company from Ireland.
Oh, with Reboot, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, Reboot. We were in contact with Reboot. I forget for which artist last year.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I'm not sure what the connection is. I think Reboot, BLK is definitely a integral part of Reboot.
Right.
I'm not sure if he's founder, owner.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not too sure what that connection is, but I do know that he's really involved in Reboot. And Reboot looks like they have some really fun events.
I haven't looked into him as much, but only through like BLK. But I'm sure you, being part of Animal House, you'd be all over all the event organisation companies, especially over in Europe. I was going to ask as well, do you see Animal House going into Europe eventually? Like, obviously, super long term. Obviously, it's a very ambitious goal, but is that a possibility for Animal House? Obviously, the sky's the limit at the end of the day, but
I mean, of course, sky's the limit at the moment. So the way I'd look at it, so Teletech is, I don't know if you know Teletech. They're one of Europe's kind of biggest techno promoters, groups, labels. They're pretty much everything.
Yeah. And
they have a presence across heaps of different countries in Europe, because with a European passport and a European business, you can operate pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
But I've heard rumors and things around that they were interested in coming to Australia. I don't know what's happening with it, but they're one of the most established brands in the world. So maybe if Animal House grew to that scale, we're sure we'd love to take it to Europe one day and engage in those markets. I think an important next step for us in terms of where we go from here is taking it to the other states. So running a show in Melbourne would probably come first.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I know the guys over at Scenes have already kind of started ticking those boxes. They had Labatt down in Melbourne the other week.
I saw that. Yeah.
That looked like a really good event as well.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we'd love to start making those moves into state, and we've got some ideas for how we do it. But is it as straightforward as one might think, or is it much more complicated? It's not to the extent that I've looked into it and pursued it.
Yeah.
It's not too confusing, or it's not too crazy. Dependent on how well you can kind of connect with the venues in Melbourne. You're not going to host an event unless a Melbourne promoter kind of knows who you are.
Yeah, right.
And responds to your email.
Right.
And so I have looked into it, but because there is no real boundary between you, if you're a business in New South Wales, you can go and operate in Melbourne, Perth, however you like. Yeah, so it is kind of a similar process to Sydney, but instead of booking a venue in the city, you're booking a venue in Melbourne. Right. And then there is a bit of logistics in terms of kind of who's going down there and organising flights. And
yeah, so it'd be a bit more complicated than one in Sydney, a little bit.
Well, a little bit more. And flights now are pretty easy. They're pretty okay to manage now that they're all getting more back on track with being a bit more reliable. Yeah. But yeah, we would love to kind of make that move, and hopefully maybe back end of this year and start of next year.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask when did you want to sort of already see Animal House in Melbourne, but yeah, I guess you had the answer already.
There are some ideas for opportunities that we may pursue if we decide to go down that route. Obviously, we haven't made anything certain yet. But that would be kind of back end of this year, start of next year. That would be where we'd want to start with a Melbourne show, and then if there was the opportunity for a big enough act that we happen to be touring, and we were confident that they'd do well in the other markets, Perth, Brisbane, we would definitely look into those. But
yeah, awesome.
I am interested to see how those. I'm interested to learn more about how those markets work, because you do hear a lot. They are, from what I've heard, a lot more complicated markets. It's not as simple as, okay, an act will sell in Sydney, and so it'll sell in Brisbane and Perth as well. Yeah. And I guess that's the advantage of, if we were running a tour, we would be looking to push it to another promoter that's established themselves in those markets, because they have a much more rich and deep understanding of how markets respond to different artists and different genres, and that would be a massive learning curve for us to be able to execute it properly.
So that's something on the cards and touring artists for Animal House?
I think touring artists is on the cards for every... I think it's on the minds of every collective. I think it's a really important step to take in terms of... Not just in terms of getting access to artists you want, but in terms of learning what it's like from the other side of the coin. If you're booking internationals through an agency like Hardware, gaining a bit more perspective on what goes into the actual tour, some of the costs involved as well. Yeah. You start to learn where your money's going some of the time.
Yeah, of course.
And so, I think, God, when would we like to do a tour? We're in May now. I think maybe back end of this year, start of next year.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Lots of insights. Like, it's, as I said before, it's crazy to think that someone that just attends these events thinks it's so simple. But
I used to be like that.
Yeah, but I'm sure now that you're in it, it's a lot more. You obviously see the inner workings of it. Would you say companies or promotions like Sash and Lost Sundays, what's your opinion on them? Obviously, they've established themselves in Sydney. Obviously as a weekly thing on Sundays, obviously. But what's your opinion on them and how they've sort of established their brand and how they're, I guess, progressing the scene in Sydney?
I think I'll start with weekly events in general, because I have massive respect to the guys at Black Noir, Raw, Lost Sundays and Sash, especially Lost Sundays and Sash. I can't imagine the amount of consistent effort and overlapping of events and schedules that have gone on over I don't know how old Sash is. It's 13 or 14. I think it's 13
they've been doing
now.
it for a long time.
But I'm sure Kerry Wallace would be able to speak a lot more to what it's actually taken to get the brand to where it is now. But in terms of Lost and Sash specifically, as I said, they've both done a great job over Sash over a much longer period, and Lost much more recently, of generating a lot of popularity around the event. And that's a really, really, especially for me, I don't really have too much background in marketing.
Right.
But in terms of generating popularity for an event, just for the event itself, just for being Lost, separate to what artists they've got or the venue that they're hosting in, I think that is a massive challenge. And I think they've done a really, really good job in terms of being able to execute that week on week for Sash over a decade, and Lost for the last couple of years. And weeklies are not, you asked before about the kind of where Animal House is going in terms of monthly or weekly. I don't think we'd ever go to a weekly.
Too much stress. Would you say it's like too much stress?
It's not too much stress. I think, I don't know, it seems like just kind of, it's hard to kind of put into words, but I'd feel like I'd be worried about getting into the trap of putting an event on because I have to put an event on.
Right, yeah.
The way we look, and that's not to say that Sash and Lost have done that. Obviously, they're a weekly thing, so they have the events that they put on.
Yeah, of course.
But they've done it in a way that they've cultivated a roster of artists who constantly have events that grow their popularity, grow their brand, and really do very well. But for us, we're not at the point yet where we can string together 12 internationals in 12 weeks. So
of course, I imagine that'd be difficult.
it would in my mind, it would be a logistics nightmare.
Yeah,
and
of course.
So Sash and Lost, I'm sure, have company structures that, same as Hardware and Untitled, are built to execute that properly. And obviously, from a business perspective, we will be trying to increase efficiencies and make those back-to-backs possible, because they do arise from time to time, and you, as a company, you do have to be ready to execute when the opportunity presents itself. But I can't see myself running weekly events. which we will, in my mind, run events when we see it, when we either create the opportunity through a tour or are presented the opportunity to host an artist. That's when we'll put the event on. And if that's back to back for several successive weeks, I doubt it will be. But we would obviously pursue that and execute that as best as our company would facilitate.
Awesome. Again, repeating myself here, but plenty of insight. It's, as I said, crazy to think, especially with Sash and Lost Sundays, as like a person that just attends the event. There's so much going behind the scenes. And I think it's just good to have someone like you on the show, especially this early on, to sort of give that perspective as how, what actually goes on behind the scenes. And obviously Animal House is still in the very early stages of what it could potentially be. And I think it's very encouraging to hear that obviously you have those, you and your group of mates and the company itself, as these awesome ambitions to sort of drive the scene in Sydney. Which is,
and I think, like, every collective in Sydney, especially the younger ones like us, Scenes, Pulse Music, KNC events, they're the kind of a group of organisers that we have a really good and close relationship with, particularly the guys at Scenes off the back of Trym. I think all of the groups are immensely ambitious, have real ideas of where they want to take their brands and what that means in terms of artist bookings. And I think everyone in the Sydney scene is taking steps to execute those and to constantly take their events up a notch. I think you always have to grow and you always have to explore new options, and sometimes it means taking on artists that are a bit more risky, but sometimes it can be, you've really wanted an act, it'll sell well, and you're finally given that opportunity. And so those opportunities are either created or presented to you, and you do have to take them when they come to you. But I think a lot of the groups in Sydney are doing really well to kind of get to that point. And I mean, I think a really good thing is some of the work that we've done between each other. Obviously, the joint venture with Scenes for Trym it kind of exemplifies it for me. The collaboration between the two groups was pretty much seamless. I think particularly Felix and I worked quite well together in terms of Felix has a really strong marketing background, really understands what the market responds to in terms of branding and event perception, as I was talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously my background at uni, I quite enjoy just kind of cranking out the budgets, managing some of the operations and financial side of things. And that plus the kind of contribution of the rest of my team and the rest of Felix's team, I think it worked out really well, and everyone was contributing, everyone was working really closely together, and it was pretty much perfect.
Yeah,
between the two.
It was a great event, as I said. I attended it, so I thought it was run perfectly. Yeah, and Liberty Hall again being a great venue. But thank you for all this insight.
No worries.
As I said, being someone that attends this stuff, it's very encouraging to hear what you have planned for Animal House, and obviously understanding what goes behind the scenes. But yeah, it's been an awesome episode.
Thank you very much.
Huge insights, awesome stuff, great information. If you guys want to follow Animal House, they're on Instagram at
animal.house with 2 A's and 2 E's.
2 A's and 2 E's. Follow them. Obviously, they're having a break during winter, but in September, in summer in Australia, in Sydney, they'll be back hosting events, and I'm sure we're in for a treat with some of the artists that they have in store for us. If you want to hear more episodes from us, follow at Behind the Tune Pod on TikTok and Instagram, and make sure you subscribe on YouTube. And I'll see you next time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, man. That was legit awesome, eh?
Yeah.
1 hour 7. Perfect. That's exactly what I want.
Awesome.